During the spring of the year, you have a unique time frame where some of those really big female bass are starting to move shallow in order to spawn. And just before the spawn and just after the spawn is one of the absolute best times to go out and throw a spinnerbait. So today I'm going to talk about 3 tips that you can use with your spinnerbait to catch a lot more bass. So let's dive on in. If you know anything about a way a bass can see, it can see red colors and green colors really well. That is why green pumpkin is odds on one of the best colors to use for bass. But like I said just a second ago, one of the best colors a bass can see is red. Now during the springtime, the color red is even more important than normal because you have a crayfish that is in a lot of the different bodies of water that you fish, known as a red swamp crawfish. Now this particular crawfish will actually kind of bury and hibernate during the winter, but when it comes out of its little hole during the springtime, because it has been sitting a lot of times in red clay and it's eating all the little zooplankton that is in that clay, it actually picks up on some of that pigment, and this crawfish will be very red in color at times. And a crawfish is also a very easy meal for a bass. So anytime I am fishing in the spring, and specifically when I am throwing a spinnerbait, I really like to incorporate some sort of red or orange or pink blade on my spinnerbait. I have seen this be a huge difference in the number of bites and the number of quality bites that you get in the springtime. I fished a tournament years ago. There was 75 boats in this tournament and almost everybody was fishing in the exact same little area. Now, everybody was throwing chatterbaits and spinnerbaits. I happened to be throwing a spinnerbait that was like this. It had a red little kicker blade on it, and we were able to get 4th place in that tournament. Yes, we didn't win, but we beat a lot of other anglers who were fishing in the exact same areas that we were, and I really believe it was because of that little red blade that I had on my spinnerbait. Now, moving on to tip number 2, a lot of times when the bass are moving up in the springtime, they really relate to cover that you can visibly see with your own eyes. This might be cover like lily pads or a grass line. A lot of times this is going to be stumps and laydowns, different wood that is in the water. These are really prime areas and prime targets to fish a spinnerbait by. It's really a prime area for the fish to pull up to. Another thing that you see in the springtime, especially in that pre-spawn, is we get a lot of cold fronts. And what happens a lot of times in those cold front situations is the bass will get really tight to cover, like really tight to cover. So sometimes what I have seen is anglers that get in my boat and they're not putting that bait right into the cover where the bass is. They're afraid that they're going to get hung up. So they're really fishing the outskirts of that cover. They're not really getting inside the cover. And the great thing about a spinnerbait is it is an extremely weedless bait. I mean, you can bring this thing through, you know, lily pads and grass and things like that, but you can really fish this around dock posts and laydowns. You can really fish a spinnerbait in some heavy cover without it getting hung up. For instance, like a crankbait or a lipless crankbait might get hung up. So tip number 2 is really fish this bait inside of the cover. I mean, cast it right over a laydown, right into a laydown, right through the lily pads. And I'm telling you what, simply getting that bait in that cover is going to help you to catch a lot more fish. The other thing about fishing cover is not only do I want my bait to be close to the cover, but I've seen days out on the water where you simply hit the cover. You hit a stump, you pop that bait over that stump and let it fall for a second, and that is when you get a bite. It causes a reaction strike from a bass. Literally, they can't reach out and inspect something with their little fins, right? They don't have hands like people do. So the way that they inspect it, they go up there and they eat the thing. That's the only way for them to find out what this thing is that just hit their home and what can they do with it. So not only do you want to fish that bait close to cover, try to hit it against the cover. Hit it against that stump, hit against that dock piling, and you're going to catch a lot more fish with a spinnerbait. Now, the third thing when it comes to fishing a spinnerbait in the springtime, and this is a little bit more advanced, but I feel that a lot of guys spend way too much time in the bottom of their boat trying to pick out the right color lure. They put a huge emphasis on color. And while I do think that red is really important in the springtime, I think that a bigger component, something that can really kind of make or break your day out there on the water, is actually the blades that you go with on your spinnerbait. There are days where bass really like a hard thumping vibration, okay? A lot of times when I'm fishing in muddier water situations, I will use Colorado bladed spinnerbaits because those spinnerbait blades have a very hard thump. It really kind of notifies the bass that something is close by. Now, on the flip side of things, I have seen days out on the water where too much thump, especially in clear water situations, can actually deter a bass from biting that spinnerbait. That's not always the case, but there's just days where changing up your spinnerbait blades is going to get you a lot more bites than changing up the color of that bait. Now, the last thing that I want to go over is just my rod and reel setup. I get a ton of comments. Probably the most comments I get on YouTube are all about what rod, what reel, what line. So I want to talk about that real quick before we go. This rod here is the Arc Tharp Series hammer rod. It's a 7-foot rod. It is the perfect spinnerbait rod. To me, 7 foot is really kind of the perfect spinnerbait length rod. It's not too short, it's not too long. It allows me to make very accurate casts as well as very long casts. I like to fish spinnerbaits on a 7.3-to-1 gear ratio reel. This is kind of a middle of the road gear ratio reel. I really like it for spinnerbaits because sometimes I'm fishing spinnerbaits really fast and other times I am slow rolling those spinnerbaits. So something in that 7 range like this Bruin ELS reel is perfect for spinnerbaits. Now, when it comes to the line, I almost always fish spinnerbaits on 20-pound fluorocarbon line. My personal choice is the Spro Essential Series Gookin fluorocarbon. I recently did a test of this line and it is the best line out there on the market, especially for the buck. I will leave links down below for all of the tackle as well as my favorite spinnerbaits. So if you guys want to check them out, click on those links down below. Thanks for watching and I'll see you guys in the next video.